Hi everyone, I'm Nadia, and in today's video we're going to be making some resin crystals using real crystals. I have some pyrite here as well as some amethyst, and we'll also be testing it out with a resin crystal I have already made. So in order to do this, I'm going to be using some silicone putty, and this is from Let's Resin. It has a mixing ratio of 1:1 by weight, a work time of 3 minutes, and a cure time of 15 to 20 minutes. So because it goes by weight, I'm taking out my small kitchen scale, and I also took a small piece of baking paper and placed it on top of my scale just to keep everything clean. I'm not entirely sure why I did this because my scale is covered in resin anyway, so this step is probably not necessary, but I made sure to hit that clear button so that the scale doesn't take the weight of the baking paper into consideration. I took out a chunk of the part A and it weighed out to be 76 grams, so I decided to round up to 80 and kept adding small amounts until I got to that number. Then I'm taking my part B and making sure that I have 80 grams of that as well. And now I'm just mushing and squishing them together until they combine into one solid color. I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about YouTube memberships. It's something that I recently introduced into my channel. And if you enjoy our channel and want to help support our creations, you can now become a YouTube member for a small fee and also get early access to videos. Or you can check out my Patreon page where for my paid tiers I provide bonus content, tips and tricks, and answers to any questions that you may have. Now that that's all one color, I separate a small amount and start rolling it into a ball. Then I take my pyrite and just push it down right into the center. And I'm making sure that all of the sides are covered. Then I realized that I was a little too excited to get started and didn't take into consideration that the silicone putty mixed together would stick onto the baking paper. So I picked up what I could and then moved everything onto this vinyl sheet. Unfortunately, my camera stopped recording here, but I did the same exact thing I did with the pyrite crystal to my other crystals. With my fingers, I pushed up the silicone upwards or towards the bottom of the crystal, making sure that every area is covered. I waited for it to finish its curing process and came back to demold. And I just placed the vinyl onto this frame so that when I was done with my pour, I could move it out of the way and start working on another project. Demolding took a little bit of time and was a little bit tricky. I found that the thicker molds were a lot easier to demold versus the crystals that were surrounded with a thin layer of silicone putty. What's interesting here, and as you might be able to see in the video, is that while I was demolding, some areas actually cracked through the side. However, this didn't affect my resin pour at all and still kept the resin in with no leaks whatsoever. Now that we have our molds and they're ready to be used, I'm mixing in my resin. In today's video, I'm using Let's Resin, and it's a 1:1 ratio by volume, so I mix in equal parts of the A and B. An easy way I like to measure my resin if it's by volume is to just pour one part into a cup and mark the cup so I know how much of the B to pour. You just need to make sure that you're scraping the resin very well while you're pouring it into another cup so that you get out as much residue as possible. And I mix both parts together well and slowly for several minutes. Once I'm sure that the resin is mixed in well and no streaks are visible, I start to separate it into smaller cups to add in my pigments. I'll have all of the products that you see in this video listed in my description. I'll be using a combination of Let's Resin's mica powder and Opal flakes. And the first combo is the goldenrod mica powder and the gold opal flakes, followed by the pink mica powder and pink opal flakes. Next is the spring green mica powder and sky blue opal flakes. And lastly, I'll be using the purple mica powder and violet opal flakes. I take turns adding each into their cup of resin. I'm careful not to add in too much mica powder because I don't want the crystals to be opaque. Once everything is mixed in, I can start pouring into my molds. I start off with my gold cup of resin, and I poured that into the pyrite-shaped mold. I left enough space to be able to pour a little bit of clear resin on top. Next, I move on to my pink pigmented resin, but first I'm using a torch gun to pop any air bubbles that have risen to the top of the cup. And I pour that into one of the molds that I used on a resin crystal. Next is my greenish blue pigmented resin, and I pour that into the largest mold, which was also from a resin crystal. Then I accidentally poured my gold again into the mold where the amethyst crystal was, so I tried to pour that out and then go back in with my purple pigmented resin. I carefully used my torch gun to pop bubbles and paid extra attention not to burn my resin or my molds. And here I am the next day demolding. This one still has some gold residue left on it, so it's not entirely purple like how I initially wanted it to be, but I still love the look of it. So these came out nice, but I want to add a little bit more of a wow factor. So to do so, I'm using some Opal vinyl. I trace out the shape of my crystals and cut out the vinyl one by one. I'm using Mod Podge to stick the vinyl onto my resin crystals. However, if it doesn't adhere, you can also use super glue or resin glue. And here's the final product. The gold resin crystal from the pyrite mold ended up being my favorite. Let me know what your favorite is in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. Follow me on my Instagram, Summer Girl Designs, and my mom's Instagram, Wild Heart Resin Art.